So our next unit is going to be on learning how to balance and classify chemical reactions. So before we get into that, the next unit, we need to develop some basic skills for being able to balance and classify equations, and that's what this lecture is about. Okay, so a chemical reaction is some kind of process that happens when at least two or more molecules, atoms, or ions interact in some way. And not only interact, but they have to interact in the right way at the right time. Okay. So we talked about the different signs of chemical change this year, but a chemical change, just to review, is where molecules or atoms are rearranged to form something new. Okay. So the signs we might notice are color change, energy being released or absorbed as heat, light, or sound, some kind of smell being given off, a precipitate forming. Remember, a precipitate is a solid that forms when two liquids are mixed. We also might notice that there's bubbling and fizzing. Okay, so those are really the 5 signs. Another thing that you want to remember is that chemical changes are not easily undone. So you should always kind of ask yourself, can it be undone or not? Okay. All right. Have developed a shorthand way to represent what's going on in a chemical reaction, and we use chemical formulas and symbols. Okay, so for example, and I'm going to move this arrow to where it actually should be, and it doesn't look like a great arrow, but there we go. Okay, so it's a shorthand way that chemists represent what's happening in a reaction, because reaction, if we wrote it out in words, could take pages and pages. Okay, so we're going to talk about the parts of this equation, I believe, on the next slide. So yes, chemical equations do have specific parts. Okay, so some things that you're going to notice when you look at this slide. What goes into the reaction, the reactants are always written on the left-hand side, and what comes out of the reaction, those are the products. Okay, okay. Whoops, and that should say right. Okay. In this equation, we see some color-coded numbers that I put in here. That 2 that I just circled, the 2 is a coefficient, and coefficients are written in front of compounds or molecules or atoms, and they multiply the atoms written directly after it. And star this somehow, make it really stand out, because this is really important to us. Okay. The other thing that you see when you look at this, and I think you can see this on this slide, I'm not sure, but I hope you can, is not, you can't see the whole slide. Okay, so you're going to want to look at least, and look at what you can see and apply my explanation, or write down the rest of my explanation. Okay, so this green 2 right here, and this green 2, we know that those are subscripts. Okay, we've been working with those. Subscripts apply to just the atom in front of them. Okay, so this subscript right here, this 2, applies to the Cl. This subscript right here applies to the H. Okay. The other thing that you see in this equation that I'm circling right now are state of matter or form symbols. Okay, so they're not necessarily involved in the equation, but they basically mean what form is the substance is. Is it a solid? Is it dissolved in water? Because that's what AQ means, dissolved in water. So aqueous. Okay, or is it a gas? Okay, so in this equation, if I were interpreting this, it would say solid zinc metal combines with hydrochloric acid, which is a solution of hydrogen chloride dissolved in water. A reaction happens, and it forms zinc chloride that's dissolved in water and hydrogen gas. In order to balance equations, we have to be able to do what are called inventories of atoms. So in other words, we have to be able to count up how many atoms are making up a substance. Okay, so coefficients and subscripts are actually involved. So I'm looking at these three substances. I'm seeing coefficients, I'm seeing subscripts. And these numbers right here, they should be written down below, but when this file got transferred, it got rid of my formatting, okay? So the way this works is it's always the coefficient times the subscript. And it works the way you distribute things in math, okay? So, for example, and we're actually going to have to start breaking compounds down into the elements or ions that make them up, okay? So I look at and I write down what are the two elements that are in this compound, okay? I look at the subscript and I multiply it by the coefficient. Okay. So you write down the elements, and in this case, I'm going to keep the NO3 together as a group, and you'll understand more about why I did that when we talk about balancing. I write down the subscript, and I multiply by the coefficient. Okay. All right, this compound, I'm going to do the same thing. What's in it? Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. I'm going to write down the subscript. And I'm going to multiply it by the coefficient. So 36, 36, and 72. Okay. Same thing here. I'm going to keep the NH4 as a group. And I'm going to keep the PO4 as a group. And you'll understand more about why I did that when we go to balancing. Okay, it's a strategy. I write down the subscript. I multiply by the coefficient. Okay. So in this unit, you're going to be doing this yourself. Okay. All right, so when we balance a chemical equation, they're balanced to show that this law right here is being followed. And basically the law of conservation of mass and matter that says that the atoms that go into a reaction have to come back out. So the mass in is equal to the mass out. So grams in equals grams out. Okay. So balancing a chemical equation is what we're going to be learning about, and we're going to be learning about it in application of this law. The next thing that we'll be doing once I see that you're inventorying okay, is that we're going to be working on types of chemical reactions. There are actually 5 to 6 different types, and these are different broad categories that reactions fall into. And I think we're going to learn about 5 of them. And that'll be our next task. Okay, so your job for the rest of today in class or for is to practice with inventory. So you're going to get some practice.